Hello everyone, before we get started into this next episode, I wanted to remind everyone that if you've never had a chance to make it out to the Archives of Falconry in Boise, Idaho, that you can go to the Archives website at falconry.org and click on the Collection tab, and from there you can explore thousands of collection items using keyword or advanced searches. If there's something in your collection that you would like to donate to the archives, you can also contact them at info@falconry.org. And of course, visit falconry.org if you haven't yet become a member and would like to. Now, on to the next episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast.
As I'm running down, I'm trying to grab the ducks. And, I see the ducks trying to get away, so I just jump right in. And this was in the middle of winter. Like, dead winter. Everything's frozen. So I jumped in, grabbed my ducks. My phone got wet, lost my sunglasses. I lost so many things. And pulling my ducks out, I'm, giving everyone high five. All of my clothes are completely frozen. And here I am in the middle of a parking lot, stripping to my underwear, trying to find dry clothes. And everyone's just driving around looking at us like, what is wrong with these guys?
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast. And the guest for this episode is one that you've heard from briefly before a couple of times, the first time of which was the Teddy Moritz tribute episode that we put together, and last week, actually, for the New Jersey Roundtable discussion that we had as well. So out of all the episodes that I've recorded for the podcast so far, I really have to say that this episode with Pac and hearing his background and life story and quest in falconry is definitely one of the most interesting and entertaining ones that I've probably heard thus far. He has gone through a lot in his life and had to overcome really a lot of adversity in his pursuit of falconry. And man, I mean, there's just so many things that could have gone wrong in his life, and hearing all the different things that he kind of had to just kind of work past, and how falconry kind of kept him on the straight and narrow through all of the different things that he had to go through early on in his life was pretty inspiring and definitely entertaining. So I think you all will find that this is one of those feel-good stories and another great example of how falconry can be a major positive in someone's life. So all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to this episode that I recorded with Pac while I was in New Jersey last summer, and you finally get to hear his story. So here we go. So, did you just come from work?
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah. Is that how many hours on average do you put in each day?
Ooh, it varies from 8 to 16, depending on how busy I am that day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got a spouse that's in healthcare, so you know how the long hour type thing, works also. I mean, I'm used to working 12, so anymore. I've had this inner debate for a long time. I don't know if I could go back to like a 40-hour a week, 8-hour a day, 5 days a week thing. I'm so used to 3 12s and having 4 days off every week now. I don't know, man.
Pittman's a great schedule for hawking. I genuinely loved it because I would just catch something and then just let it feed up. And the next 48 hours, I'm back on. And the bird's ready to go no matter what. Yeah. But now I pretty much work almost every day, unfortunately. Ugh. Good and bad, but my bosses are pretty flexible with my hours, so I can take a nice long lunch break, or if I'm going somewhere, I get to kind of go, oh, there's a field right there. I'll meet you guys in an hour, okay? Let me go play for an hour. So,
well, I mean, in your line, I can see where it would be similar to kind of like what we have to do with healthcare. I mean, you hope you get a 30-minute lunch break, but, depending on what kind of call you get over the comms or on the phone or whatever, sometimes that doesn't always play in to the situation.
No, I've had jobs where I brought the birds, and because they called me out where the last time I was in actually at the field meet, I had the birds, the dog, everything with me, and they called me back to a job. I was like, oh crap. And sure enough, there's a dog and bird sitting, in my truck, and everyone goes, what is this? I was like, hey, you called me. So this is what you get. It's a package deal. It's a lifestyle. That's why I will always say it's an interesting lifestyle where you kind of modify everything to the job, but at the end of the day, I think everyone who knows me knows I modified everything to falconry. So my wife had to deal with it. My kids learned to deal with it. And my job kind of adapted to it. They go, hey, as long as you get the mission accomplished, we don't care what you do. Just get the job done.
Right.
That's the way it works.
Yeah. No, I feel you. I wish I had that flexibility, but when I'm at some place for 12 hours, I'm just kind of stuck there, unfortunately. I'm, like I said, might get that 30 minutes here or there or whatever, but yeah, no, I can't just leave, unfortunately, and just kind of come back whenever, whatever. But yeah, I mean, so for those people that are listening, I know we've been kind of chatting about it already a little bit, but describe what you do for people that are listening.
I'm currently working as in law enforcement, and I deal with clandestine laboratory investigation. I do a lot of narcotics work and work for the state.
Yeah.
So law enforcement, police officer, pretty much. It's a great job. I'm learning every day. I get to say it's one of those fields where I get to use, scientific knowledge, basic problem solving, and put that in the field that most people don't think that is actually quite scientific. Mm-hmm. So yeah, like I was telling you, my dad was in law enforcement for a very long time. Did a lot of detective work and did some other specialty type stuff as well. And my brothers right now are in different aspects of law enforcement right now as well. But no, it's cool. Like, I know my wife really wanted to go into like forensic stuff and, to do the CSI type stuff or whatever. She actually has a criminal justice degree that she never really, used. And so, yeah, I don't know, man. Yeah, I know there's a lot of different stuff that goes into all that, but I'm sure that's been somewhat challenging, at least over there, even though you have the flexibility to juggle with your falconry and stuff. I can see where that would, pose some challenges, at least here and there, to be able to do it. It is. But like I said, I've been a falconer since I was probably 14. So I've been hooked on it ever since. And it pretty much dictated everything I did in my life.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I dedicated, and for lack of better words, you deal with a high stress job and you just need a place to get away. That is, there's nothing better than having a crappy day and just going out in the field, walking through the woods, and you get so focused. It's like a moving meditation. You're focusing on just your bird, and you don't really pay attention to anything else. And in modern day society, everyone's looking at their phone, paying attention to this and that. You know what? When I'm in the field, that's all I'm focusing on is, hey, where's the squirrel? Where's my bird going? And making sure I don't trip and fall down and, embarrass myself as always. That's the place to go. Or, making sure the tree doesn't fall on my head. Like, it's happened thousands of times that I'm looking up for the squirrels.
Yeah. I've talked to some other guys too that have had some interesting encounters with some pretty big tree limbs and stuff like that too. So far, aside from just the occasional splinters in the eye and stuff, I've been lucky enough to avoid the concussion from a large tree limb and stuff. But I'm sure it's probably coming at some point. But that's cool though, man. Like, it sounds like just from the short time we were kind of talking a little bit before the recording started, though, that you've had a very interesting life overall so far. And I think that's one of the cool things that's going to come out of this conversation for people to hear, because everybody has their own little path or story. And some people's are more straightforward than others. But like yours, from the short time that we've been talking, I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of it myself, because I don't know if I can even comprehend some of the things that you had to deal with whenever you were younger, especially. But man, I'm just going to go ahead and turn things over to you here and let you just kind of talk about a lot of this stuff, man. It's crazy stuff.
So my path to falconer is kind of unique. I immigrated from Thailand to the U.S. when I was about 9 or 10 years old. When I was in Thailand, I remember my mom bringing me to a famous or infamous wildlife market. It's called Jack to Jack Market in Thailand. You could buy anything. So I saw this bird. I think it was probably be considered a black-shouldered kite, and She bought it for me. I kept it. And obviously, we didn't know what we were doing. We fed it pork, and it subsequently died. So what ended up happening, that just inspired me. I started reading books. I was completely infatuated with keeping a bird. And then I saw this encyclopedia on F, and there was a peregrine falcon on someone's fist. And I was like, oh, wow, I can really do this. And that just carried me on from that point on. And then when I immigrated to the U.S., came here, I saw one of those TV show, Nature Channel on PBS, Channel 13. And there was it was a special on birds. And there was a guy who had a red tail, flying to his fist. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. I'm hooked on this. So now at that age, 7th or 8th grade, I was like, this is what I wanted to do. So during that time, I had a lot of family issue. I started watching this show, which I could barely speak English at that time. Okay. I watched a show with some kid who ran away from home, and he had a bird and he started living in the woods. So I go, oh my God, that inspired me. And unfortunately, at a young, I guess I was in 7th or 8th grade at that time, various family issue, lots and lots, won't go into detail on that. But I decided to take a deep dive, and I was like, hey, what the hell? I ran away from home. I lived on the street. I camped out in Liberty State Park for a little while, thinking I can do all of that. So that didn't work that well, but it did lead me to hooking up with a whole bunch of bird watchers, because I was always in the woods watching birds. And, I hooked up with a couple of these guys from, they're like bird watchers. And one of the guys was extremely generous, and he's like, hey, you want to be a falconer, I'll give you my, my backyard. You can use that as your mule, your falconry equipment, all that type of stuff. So as a kid, back before cell phone, before internet, I had to look everything. You got to call Fish and Game. So here I am, using a payphone. Back then, I'm dropping a quarter and calling Fish and Wildlife. Hey, and there was, you need to add 4 more cents, something stupid like that, 4 more quarters. And I'm like, oh my God. So finally got Fish and Game to send me the package. I signed in, sent everything out. So I didn't have a car back then. So I had a friend who helped me hitchhike all the way to Fish and Game Division office. I took the test there, aced it, right? And he's like, at no time did anyone ask me, where's your parents? So I was about 14 at this time. And I was like, hey, so finally, now it comes down to inspection. So during that time, with the whole falconry process, they provided me a name of another falconer who could potentially sponsor me. Unfortunately, he was borderline criminal himself. No, he is a criminal, but he led me to all the path of how I can secure all of my falconry equipment and all of my mule and all that stuff, in an improper way. So I secured all of that. I built my own mule, built everything, secured everything, like the bath pan. I remember he was telling me, just, on a garbage night, just grab your bicycle, grab the garbage can and just put it on your back and just drive away with it on your bicycle. So that's how I got my first bath pan. And he's like, how do you get, food for the hawk? He's, just catch a pigeon on the roof. So here I am jumping from roof to roof, on the train trestle in Jersey City, catching all these pigeons, shoving them in my book bag, giving half to my sponsor and half to me just to hold. So that was how I was taught to do falconry. So subsequently, a couple months later, I finally got myself inspected. Fish and Game comes by, they go, okay, everything looks squared away. But I always laugh at the process that throughout the entire process, no one asked a 14-year-old kid, where's your parents? Did your parents sign off on any of this stuff? There was no permission slip to do falconry. So I kind of just did it on my own at that point. Started trying to go trapping, trying to do everything on my own. So I live in Jersey City at that time. Jersey City is a very urban area, pretty much just a few miles away from New York City. The only location where you could find, an open ground was Liberty State Park. So at that time, I would just, go around in my bicycle, have a BC in the back of my bicycle. As I'm driving around through the park, I would see a red tail or a kestrel, and here I am just trying to trap them in the park or, in any of these abandoned lot. Like I read Heinz Make Falcon's Return, and he was talking about the dug-in where you kind of just lay in on the ground. So I couldn't have that. So I said, let me try that. So I tied a pigeon to a string, laid on the ground. I went and got a cardboard box from my garbage and just covered myself with a cardboard box. I laid there for like 2 days, not realizing that you had to have a pathway. There's no migration path until finally one day a Cooper's hawk came down, grabbed the pigeon. I grabbed his leg, and not being a high school kid, I grabbed only one leg, and the other leg grabbed my hand, so I let it go, and it flew away. And I'm standing there, oh my god, what am I gonna do? I just lost my bird, not knowing any better. And to give you the perspective on why I had to do a lot of stuff on my own, my sponsor at that time ended up losing his license. So Fish and Game says there's no one else close to you at that time, and they said, all right, you're on your own, kid. Good luck with everything. So they kind of left me alone. I had to learn everything on my own, and fortunately, I made a lot of mistakes, but it worked out on my behalf in a sense, because back then there was no internet. If I didn't have a car, I was 14, 15-year-old. I couldn't get any sponsor who would want to drive that far away from me. So they pretty much kind of just blessed me. They're like, hey, don't get into any trouble, my friend. Good luck. And I did everything on my own at that time. Caught my own red tail, kestrels, did everything. And it was an interesting experience.
I have so many questions. All right. It's just, so let's back up a little bit then. So whenever you were, quote unquote, running away from home and you were homeless and, kind of living like this, what were you doing for food? What were you doing for the basic amenities? What were you doing for, I got to know a little bit more of these details because, man, this is, my mind's blown right now. I've got to know more. I got to know more about some of just the basic details of how your life was at this time.
Well, at that time, I was bumming from house to house, going from friends. And, this is where I said, okay, there was a benefit to being in school at that time because I got food, breakfast, lunch.
So you were still in school?
Yes, sir. I was in 8th grade in high school. And then I was going from house to house, bumming from people, eating from, garbage and stuff like that. I was squatting. And then subsequently, what ended up happening was I ended up getting a job at one of those birdwatcher guys, knew a guy who owned a business. And he's like, hey, someone needs a dishwasher. So I ended up getting a job as a dishwasher at a pizzeria, Helen's Pizzeria, in downtown Jersey City. And that was the foundation that got me into secured housing and everything. So I was a swimmer at that time. That's where I took my shower in school. So that was gym class.
All right,
that was where I went to school. I didn't have a lot of clothes. I was definitely that weirdo kid. School provided me with food, and a lot of the guidance counselor kind of knew my situation. They were like, well, if we dime him out, Dyfus comes by, and then he disappeared for weeks. So they're like, if we don't bother him, he comes to school. He doesn't bother anybody. And so it subsequently, it could definitely never happen in today's age. This was 1996, 1997. I got away with, amazing stuff. And it eventually led to me getting a little apartment on my own. And I was able to afford it with just a little bit. And, it's definitely a bachelor apartment. It was just one crappy sleeping bag on the floor, a table. It was definitely nothing that I was definitely not a chick magnet, type of thing. It's definitely a bachelor pad.
Very nice. So, you're still kind of not really having much contact at home then, doing all this stuff by yourself. And so did you make it then? Did you end up graduating? Did you make it all the way through high school then?
Yes. This is where I contribute, I was exposed to a lot of negative stuff as a high school kid. And what saved me a lot was just, I was, constantly focusing on, I was, like every falconer, we're all interested in reptiles. So I had a collection of reptiles. I had a collection and I had my kestrel at that time and a red tail. So I was playing around with all these different birds. So I know the state was like, we're going to put you in a nursing home. I'm not a nursing home, a group home. And I was like, no, not without my animals. So we kind of worked it out where they just go, look, kid, you're doing fine on your own. I was still going to school, was getting decent grade. I graduated. And what ended up happening subsequently was after, Dyfus and everyone tried to get involved, the state ended up working out a deal where they'll help me out, pay half of my rent. So that was the blessing for me. So I ended up going to school. I went to college, did everything on my own. Falconry kind of kept me in a straight line, and I was focused on that. I never really strayed, got into drugs, got into anything stupid like that. Because instead of going out to a Saturday night, I'm sitting there waiting for fall, trying to go trapping, doing something, chasing squirrels, doing some stupid stuff like that.
Yeah, you had a purpose.
Yes, that was my goal. And that, we went through that stage where, like all falconers and reptile collector, you go to that Pokemon stage. You got to collect them all. You got to go there and fly every bird. It's definitely quantity over quality.
Oh, yeah.
So I had every type of birds, anything I can trap, I was flying them. I was testing it out, losing them here and there. This was before telemetry. I remember some of the dumbest stuff I did. As soon as I got my general, I was like, let me fly a long wing because there's peregrines around here. So not, thinking back as a high school kid, I grabbed a peregrine Perry from a breeder. I saved all of my money, and then I bought a peregrine Perry. I raised it. It was doing well. It went up, chased the bird all the way to New York City, and it was found like 4 months later dead at a Canadian airport. And I didn't have telemetry, so I was like, okay. That was an expensive lesson.
Yeah. And as my buddy, Matt Mullinex has said many times, it's like, we don't really, we basically just continually were paying tuition in all of this, I mean, it's funny, like it really is a constant. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter what the expense is. I mean, some lessons are cheaper than others in the overall scheme of things. But yeah, we never stop paying tuition when it comes to all this stuff.
Now, my wife always kind of busts my chops a lot. Now she's like, you have all these goshawk that subsequently ended up either dying from West Nile, hitting a window. Something bad always happened with goshawk. Goshawk always has a way to find a way to kill himself. So my wife would sit there and she's like, you get mad at me when I buy these expensive purse or these, it's like, at least I keep it. You just throw it away. So that was, I spent a lot of money on this. Is an expensive hobby, but I always said every man has his vice. This is my vice.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of vices. I mean, this really truly can be as cheap or as expensive as you want to make it to in a lot of ways. I mean, you can keep buying captive bred birds, or you can just settle with going, 10 minutes down the road, or not even that sometimes. Sometimes you can even get away with trapping a passage redtail in your backyard or something. I mean, it's...
Yeah, I trapped a couple in my backyard. The only thing that I would say, and, I was obsessed with goshawk for the past 10 years or so. But what ended up happening, I was going to do all of these trips, and my wife's like, you know what, you're getting too old, and you're too valuable to break your leg falling off a tree, and you go out spending so much money on a trip to go hopefully find a bird. It's like, just work a couple overtime and you pay for it, and it's a guaranteed thing. But you're missing the adventure component of it. That's what you're missing.
Exactly. Yeah. And I totally agree. And that's a big reason why other buddies of mine, and well, including myself, I mean, I've gotten a chance to go on a couple of those types of trips, and yeah, I mean, it's easy enough. You're actually saving money in most cases by just buying a captive bred bird, but you're not getting the stories and the experiences and the other memories that go along with it.
Yeah, but at this stage of my life, time is money.
Sure.
Time away from the wife and kids is that's penance I got to pay. And time away from work, it's something that you have to sit there and go, okay, I'm not working for this week. You're going to lose some money. And it's easier for me just to, get a bird that you can just pick up from the airport. It just makes your life so much easier.
You're preaching to the choir on the time is money thing, man. I totally get it. You're totally preaching to the choir. Totally relate. And yeah, I mean, I'm glad that I've gotten to have the experiences that I've had so far in all of this. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, it's funny when you think back about how many hours and how much money and how much... it's like, what kind of dollar amount can you really put on time and memories? Like, how much are those really worth, and how much were they worth to you then, as opposed to, was it really worth it when you look back on it now? So you graduate, you go to college, you do all this other stuff. I mean, were you still kind of living around the same area then? I mean, where did you end up, or did you end up relocating at some point, or were you always kind of living around the same area when you were continuing your pursuits and your further education and stuff?
Well, I lived in Jersey City, and I continue to stay in Jersey City. That's where all of my connection and all of my friends and, people who can help me out and jobs. So during that time, I was a lifeguard. I was an EMT. So that's what kept me in Jersey City. That was secure cash for me. And then I practiced falconry in Jersey City, in a place where most people would not expect me to fly hawks. And, surprisingly, most people don't realize. I was like, oh, because when you read falconry books, you're like, oh, you got to go out west, someplace where there's nobody. And some of the best hawking I've hawked has been in the most urban area, where you would not expect, like a narrow strip of like 10 large trees. It's full of games. And I've always find that kind of ironic for me now that I live in somewhat more of a suburb area. When I want to enter a young bird where I know it's going to be a guaranteed game, I would take them back to Jersey City, to just a small strip, right above a parking lot or behind Home Depot or somewhere right by a playground. Like, one of the safest places that I've always liked to go hawking is definitely in the schoolyard. No one's shooting your bird there. It's safe, and there's so much games there because there's so much food from the kids. As long as you don't go there during the week, you're perfectly fine. And, right after school. And when my kids were younger, I would just let them play in the playground, and daddy's walking around with a red tail up in the tree. So I could hawk with a red tail or Harris hawk or even a goshawk. You could hawk them in a small lot, like a third of an acre. As long as there's game, you could always hawk. And I find that was the most contradictory to what most people believe, that falcon can be done. Everyone's like, you assume you have to be far, far away. I did some great hawking in an urban area.
Well, I mean, that's a lot of where my hawking has taken place too throughout my short falconry career thus far as well. And yeah, I mean, you have to be smart and take other things in consideration, with certain areas for sure. So agreed there. You got to be conscientious of your surroundings, for sure, whenever you're doing a lot of that. And you also have to take into consideration too that the odds of people coming up to you randomly and seeing what you're doing and having questions is probably going to happen a lot as well also. But I'm sure you probably ran into that type of stuff as well, didn't you? Yeah,
most of the time, most people don't, especially in the urban area, don't even look up. I'm just that weirdo who's walking around with a shoulder bag and just looking around. That's about it. I mean, like, I've had some interesting story, and I'll give you a good one. I was hawking in Jersey City many years ago, right on Liberty State Park, where you can look at and see the Statue of Liberty. So I'm chasing I had a Harris hawk at the time, and we were just chasing some random animals. I don't know what it was, but she went up really high, and she came down and grabbed something. I was like, out in the open field. And I was like, what was that? And as I rolled up the hill, I could see this kid running with a hawk on his head. And I was like, oh no. And part of me goes, do I want to run up there or pretend this is a wild bird? And a split second, I go, oh crap, I got to take care of this. Yeah. So I ran down there. So this kid, you wouldn't believe it. He's wearing a raccoon, like Davy Crockett hat. So you have a head of a raccoon, a body, and a tail, and he's like a little 10-year-old kid. Walking around Liberty State Park, and what did my Harris hawk do? Oh, that's food. So I grabbed it, fortunately, and I was like, oh, I'm going to get sued. I have nothing to get sued. And he just grabbed the hat, didn't really grab the kid or anything like that. So he took the hat off, and I'm grabbing the bird. I was like, I'm so sorry, and talked to the parents, and they was just so shocked. They're like, oh my God, this is my American experience. So they're taking a picture of the bird on the hat and, making the kid wear the hat. The kid's freaking out completely. But that's where the tourist trap is out in Liberty State Park at that time. So fortunately, that knock on wood, I got away with just, something like that. And no one really made a big deal. But the kid didn't get hurt. I'm quite sure it's today I'd probably get sued. But back then, it was just these guys. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. There's a hawk. And I get a picture of it. So I ended up doing a whole nice presentation, made the kids look at it, did everything just to make sure to smooth everything out. But that does happen. So in that type of environment, like, I ended up doing really well with just a passage red tail. Passage red tail will want nothing to do with people. With my current goshawk, even though she's really good, I'm still reluctant to fly around playgrounds. Anything with kids, I try to stay away from, just because of that factor.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just, you have to weigh the risk versus the reward. And, there's, generally speaking, once again, you just got to take things into consideration, and, you do learn from experiences over time. I can tell you some other stories too. And, I mean, anybody that flies birds for long enough is going to have some kind of weird anomaly happen, whether it's, something like that or whatever. I mean, especially if you're hawking in urban areas, which unfortunately with the current state of the world and the constant expansion of suburbia, into all these different places where we're constantly losing land to development and everything else. I mean, eventually you're going to be restricted to either urban areas or certain forms of falconry that, I mean, you're whether it be like semi-residential squirrels or starlings or whatever, because I mean, eventually that's all you're going to have if you're going to be that restrictive of yourself. And if you are, that's your prerogative. But I mean, that's just the reality of the world we're currently living in. It's constantly growing and we're losing spots. So
yeah, I mean, we tried to look for rabbits, and for me, doing this for quite some time, if I could see a rabbit maybe once or twice a year, that was considered a great year for me. Prior to having a dog, I would see 1 or 2 rabbits a year if I was lucky.
Yeah.
And that was by accident. And I focused most of my hawking almost exclusively on gray squirrel. That was the only one that, I was guaranteed to catch something at least every other day. That's the way to success with falconry. You got to constantly produce game. And then I did, starlings and sparrows and pigeons with the Harris hawk. Flew the micro for a little while. But I didn't do too well with the micro in Jersey City and in New Jersey predominantly. One of the main reasons was Cooper's hawk. Mm-hmm. I lost so many kestrels to Cooper's hawk, so I pretty much just gave up on flying kestrel. Then I switched to Cooper's hawk for a while. Did about 4 eyes. Great bird, amazing. The problem is, what game are you going to hunt? Mm-hmm. So I flew male Cooper's hawk, and they can carry everything.
Yep.
So it was just not fun for me, where I was constantly do telemetry chase with my birds all the time. And then after a while, they go, oh, yeah, okay, they'll grab a starling. And then, as I'm walking up to it, they'll let go of the starling, grab my face, and go catch the starling again and carry it away. So definitely, it took the fun out of it. And, my wife would come home. She's like, she would see me, my face is bloody. She's like, oh, the bird got you again? It's like, yeah. So, and it's, I had great time flying in the middle of a parking lot, like Costco parking lot and all, like one of the best flight I've seen, just basic, fields, catching sparrows in the field with a Cooper's hawk. But the problem is it would just carry every time, and then takes the fun out of it. When you're chasing, I hate doing telemetry chase, especially in the urban area, just to give you a perspective on the danger of telemetry chase in the urban area. So, I lost my Cooper's hawk, male Cooper's hawk, just doing exactly what we were doing. And it was the day after 9/11.
Oh, God.
So
I see where this is going. Yep.
So I'm in Liberty State Park. So if you don't know, Liberty State Park's literally right across the river and that was the site of the Emergency Management Center for all of the emergency personnel. So here I am as a weird dude, walking around with a Yagi, with a headphone, beep, 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 beep. And let's just say it was adventurous that I had a whole bunch of cops called upon me. Yeah. But fortunately, the park ranger that time, kind of knew me, like, you might not want to do this here. We know you. You're the weirdos, but the state police and all the federal agent may not know you. So you might... So they actually, to make a story short, they ended up finding my bird perching right in front of their office. So I ended up getting it from them that same night. They knew it was there, but it was one of those not walking around with a Yagi after a terrorism incident was not a smart idea. But once again, 20-year-old didn't give a crap.
Yep. Yeah. No, I mean, I've had similar experiences. I've never had the cops call on me or anything with trying to, walk around with the telemetry receiver and stuff, but people will stop and be like, what are you doing? Yeah, I mean, you get a lot of questions and a lot of funny looks for sure. And I can only God, right after 9/11. Yeah, no, I can imagine that was probably, did you have to go home and change your pants or anything afterwards?
It was definitely an adventure, to say the least. Where I go, okay, having 4 or 5 police cars stopping me, but I can't blame them.
No, it's not a fun time either way.
No.
I'm sure it wasn't for them either.
No, it was definitely an adventure. So, but that was one of those typical experiences. I go, oh, no one would ever understand. Walking around with a Yagi after 9/11 is not a good idea. But once again, at 20 years old, my foresight was not there.
Yeah.
Now I go, oh yeah, that wasn't smart, but it worked out well.
We all learn our lessons, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that was not the first time I've had cops called up on me. I've had police officer called on me so many times to a point where they know who I am just because of I'm hopping fence, I'm doing stuff, and like we would always get it's like, oh, there's a Chinese guy walking around with an eagle in his hand. I was like, okay, and they go, oh, they know who it is.
Yep. They're like, yeah, that's it's Tuesday. It might as well just be like any other day of the week. Yeah, another one of these calls.
I used to catch pigeons. One of the way I used to catch them was just I would feed them on in a park bench. As they come by, I would just reach out, grab them, or come out with a bow net and just catch them. Mm-hmm. So before anyone would ask questions, I would do that early on a Sunday morning, so no one would ask any questions. I would toss them in my duffel bag and just walk away before anyone could ask any questions. So years later on, I did that when I was in high school and college. So 10, 11 years later. So I'm working with some Jersey City cops, and they were like, yeah, you're into bird. I heard about that. And I was like, yeah. We heard about this. There was a Chinese restaurant. They used to send one of their worker coming by. He would catch all the pigeons, and we would think that was him. I was like, no, it was me. I was the guy who was catching all those pigeons in the park. And there was this whole little myth about this little Chinese restaurant that would have serve pigeons because there was someone coming by with a bow net, putting them in a duffel bag. I was like, oh, that was me from 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least it was pigeon and not like, the other types of the other types of, the other types of stereotypical animals, that are commonly accused of said practice. But no, man, that's hilarious. It sounds like you've had a hell of an adventurous, young, or at least younger part of your life anyway. I mean, I'm sure with your job and everything that you do, parts of your adult life has been adventurous as well, but it sounds like you've had a very interesting childhood and youth.
It's definitely, like I said, it's very eclectic. It's something that no one would believe, but I've always told everybody, and I particularly remind my wife, it's like, this is what kept me straight. And now, in the sense that I didn't do any of the stupid stuff that my friends did. I went to college, got my degree, became a teacher. I was a science teacher for quite some time, and during that time was great because I used falconry and reptiles to educate my kids and encourage them to go into science and all of that stuff. One of the best way to get kids who've never had pets was like, hey, you behave in my class, you get to feed that mouse to a snake. And you're going to see how many kids are going to behave, come to class every day and do everything. Just that
watch
connection.
Mouse get eaten.
Yeah, it's... As I was teaching high school kids, they were a pain in the butt. And, I got, as a first year teacher, I got stuck with those remedial 20-year-old freshmen. So I needed to make that connection. So they didn't have pets. They came from a disadvantaged, family and all that stuff. So I was like, hey, guys, let's make a deal. You guys be good. Let's, do something. And this is your pet. They get to earn that, they get to play with their pets. And you don't realize, as tough as some of these kids are, they're missing that little childhood moment. And it's such a big deal for them. Just like, hey, I have a pet hamster in my class. This is my pet hamster. Because every teacher's like, oh, you have a fish tank in your classroom? They're definitely going to put Clorox in it. And you know what? That never happened. These kids were very protective of their classroom pets.
Yeah, you gave them a vested interest in the animals.
And it worked out well. I didn't have to fight with any of my kids. I didn't have any major incident in my classroom. It worked out well. I got some of the worst kids in the world that I would not expect to turn around. They ended up doing great for me. Like the bigger bully, they were like, hey, they beat up the little bully. I kept them in line for me. So I didn't have to do any of the work.
That's great. No, yeah, I can imagine some of the different types of kids and stuff that you probably had to. I mean, like with your different careers, I mean, you never know the type of people that you're really going to run into and encounter throughout your life. And it sounds like you've gotten a chance to see people's, not just from your own perspective and how you grew up, but also, you got to see all these different types of people in different aspects of life from so many different angles. And I'm sure if nothing else, man, it's given you a broader perspective and really kind of made you rethink, how you view some stuff, not just your personal life, but I mean, I'm sure that has something to do with falconry and everything else also. I mean, there's a lot of things that I do differently now than the way I used to also, just from a lot of the different stuff that I've seen and experienced also. So
it's a great lesson. Teach me to be a lot more humble. Teach me that you can only worry about what you can control.
Exactly.
I'm not going to care about stuff that's beyond my control. I don't care about it. If I can't deal with it, I can't resolve it, then it is what it is.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that, because that's one of the lessons I've learned over the years too. And I've learned to just not stress over a lot of the stuff that you really have zero control over. I mean, it's pointless. You're going to waste a lot of energy and time and, just worrying about crap that you just can't. I mean, it would be so much better to put your energy elsewhere.
One of the lessons I've learned in life as well as falconer was, you gotta have a bad day to appreciate the good day.
Very much.
In falconry, you have many great days, but once it goes down, I've told myself I was going to quit falconry so many times.
At least once a season.
Once a season, once a goshawk. I mean, it was just got to a point. I remember as a grown man going, why am I wasting my life doing this? Why am I putting so much commitment into this? You feel sad for a day or two. Next day, all right, what bird am I going to get next?
Yep.
My wife's like, you just, she gave us up on me. She's like, yeah, you're going to feel sad. You're going to bum out for about a day or two. And guess what? Next week, you already got another replacement. You're already moving on to another bird.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy for your immediate family to identify, those kind of things. My wife and kid are both the same way. They're just like, whatever. Yeah, it's so funny. Like I've told this story before also, but it's really funny because it's really hilarious what they pick up on sometimes, and you don't even realize it. And when my kid was younger, it was like I don't know, maybe my third or fourth season. I can't remember now, but my kid was a lot younger. And I remember I was trying to man down, I think it was a red tail, another passage red tail or something. I can't remember for sure at this point. But anyway, I'm working with this bird and I'm just starting to get a little frustrated because it's baiting a lot and, whatever. And my kid just comes in the garage where I'm at, and he just takes one look, and he walks past and then takes one look again as he's getting ready to walk through the door back into the house again. He just looks at me and goes, yeah, that bird's fat, Dad. And that doesn't even say anything else. Just, that bird's fat, Dad, and just walks right back into the house. And I'm just like, you're probably right. It just cracks me up. But you don't realize, all the things sometimes that your family picks up on too. And because they know you and they see all the stuff that you deal with too. And it's so funny, man.
Yeah, I get to see that, and I'll give a great example with that with my wife. My wife is a hardcore urban girl. She definitely does not do any of the wildlife stuff. She doesn't know any snakes. And at this stage in our life, she knows every species of snakes and animals to a point where I can't sneak anything in anymore. I used to sneak in an animal, and she was like, that's just screw into something else. She's like, no. She's like, I know what that is now. She can identify snakes. She can identify birds. And it is scary. And my daughter has actually gotten into falconry now. So she's flying one of my Harris Hawks. So it's like, okay. But she's been, I've had pictures of her hawking with a backpack, So surprisingly, she's the one who's following the path. She's going to get her falconry license next year. So when she turns 14. So that's something she wants to do. I was like, hey, I don't want to be the one who's pressuring you into it. But if you want to do it, go for it.
Well, that's great. My kid could care less. Yeah, he's the typical falconry kid. The more of the rule than the exception, I guess. You know, he couldn't care less. You know,
My son is that way.
Yeah.
My son does not want to do anything with it. And actually, it was like both of my kids were at one of these county fair, and there was a guy out there with a Harris Hawk and all this stuff. And he was expecting my kids to be so impressed by it. And both of my kids just go, yeah, it's a Harris Hawk. And just walked away. And the guy was just like, he was shocked that these kids knew what that was. And the fact that they didn't care, they just rolled their eyes and just moved on and went to look at the pony.
Yeah. Yeah. That's freaking hilarious. Yeah. And it's kind of the same look that people that are such avid goshawks, you know, like get on their face whenever they expect somebody to be impressed because they've got a goshawk on their glove or whatever, and then they're all disappointed when someone's just like, yeah, that's cool, I really like that red tail over there or whatever. You know. And all of a sudden, you know, you could just feel the hurt feelings just oozing out of them, you know? Absolutely. Oh man, that's so funny. But no, I mean, that's great though that you got at least one kid that's wanting to kind of pursue the path. But before we move on, I do want to spend some time talking about something that was very quickly brushed over earlier, and it was kind of mentioned in passing almost, but you know, and it ties into the reason why this series is being done, in that, you know, we mentioned the dogs briefly. And I mean, at what point did you start, you know, kind of incorporating that in your life as well with falconry?
Well, I never planned on doing falconry with a dog. It was just additional animal to take care of, so I never planned for it. Went out to multiple falconry meets in Jersey, met Paul and Furlier, as well as Casey, and a few other guys who ended up hawking with dachshund. Mm-hmm. And they had, I mean, I would just get one rabbit or one squirrel if I'm lucky. And these guys would come home with 3 or 4 rabbits. It's like, wow, I'm covered with thorns, bleeding everywhere. And these guys would just come out with, you know, fresh hair, like the North Jersey style with the gel still in their hair. And they would look good. And they have, you know, bags full of games, and they were doing fine. So I started making a lot of inquiry into that and started hooking up with the guys, went out with them, got to see how they did it. So we didn't have an apartment at that time. So I didn't have a house. I mean, let me make clarification on that. I just got married. I had a little apartment so once we finally moved into the house, the first dog I wanted, my wife wanted a Pomeranian. So I kind of blocked her she didn't want the hot dog. She didn't want the dachshund. She didn't like the way they look. And, you know, supposedly we heard that they were a little tenacious and could be aggressive with the kids. So I was like, okay. So we didn't get that. We ended up getting a Brittany Spaniel first. Amazing dog. Loved it to death. The problem was that it's so big, and especially in the urban area where I worked in, it was roaming too wide, and it potentially get hit by a car. Mm-hmm. And then, more importantly, I'm out in the field looking for rabbits and all this stuff. The dog's looking out in the clearing. I'm in the thorns, and the dog's looking at me like, I'm not going in there. Yep. So that was when I realized, this is not, you know, the key to solving my problem here. I need something smaller. So subsequently, couple years down the road, we ended up getting the little miniature dachshund. Great dog. And I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, I went from not seeing any rabbits at all. I didn't know there were rabbits around my house, to holy crap, there's rabbits around all the field that I've been working in all this time. And it worked well with the Harris Hawk, worked well with the red tail. The only problem was this dog was just barely 5 pounds. So we had a couple of oopsies in the beginning where the red tail and the bird would just say, yeah, I could take this thing on. So there was a couple of separation. You know, that was where I had to kind of take the bird off the dog, and the bird was getting shot. The dog was kind of like, I don't want to do this anymore. But, you know, over time, and I would call Teddy Moritz was our kind of mentor on this. And I will always remember Teddy saying that, you know, I want your dog to do what it's supposed to do. If it gets killed, it is what it is. It's nature, and we'll get you another dog. And it was so unexpectedly to come from someone who breeds dog and understands and loves dog. But I think she wanted to make sure that this dog is not turned into a lap dog. And the dog turns out great, getting, you know, field championship, all that stuff that to me as a falconer, I could care less about. But it was just, and it was like, oh, it was a great training. I was like, it has nothing to do with me. That's just from the breed. And all I did was just walk it around the block and let it chase rabbits around the neighborhood. But it made my life as a falconer so much easier. And I found so much more games. And I can tell you, I went from, as we said before, from seeing a rabbit once a year to now I'm seeing rabbits maybe 3 or 4 times a week, which is in North Jersey. It's mission impossible. And then I use it for tree squirrels. So it worked out well. It's a good combination, keeps everyone. And now instead of I'm that weirdo who's walking around the park where everyone gets the creep alert on me because I'm the guy who's walking around behind the condominium with a binocular and all that stuff. Everyone's like, oh, he's definitely some type of a weirdo. We're going to call the cops on him. Now I'm just a guy walking around with a yellow wiffle bat and a dog. So I'm not that, I don't get the cops calling me now because now I have a dog, walking around and everyone think I'm chasing my dog. No one's, if I'm just, I hawk predominantly in between that area between a condominium and next to a park. So, being a stranger guy walking around in the neighborhood, people are going to think you're a little peeper. So I had a cops called on me quite a few times for that. So the dog definitely softened that perception of me.
Yeah.
Well, now it's kind of, oh, he's just, walking his dog. Or, one of the things that I started doing was I carry a wiffle ball. And that came from another falconer in Jersey who was telling me, yeah, you walk around with a wiffle bat, makes a lot of noise, and you could use it as a flushing stick. And more importantly, no one thinks you're carrying a gun. Everyone thinks you're looking for a wiffle ball. So no one asks you any questions. I never thought of that. And next thing you know, I was like, oh, this is a great thing. Now I have like 4 or 5 wiffle bat in my house just because of that.
I was going to say, you probably need that many. You probably go through that many in a season.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're not exactly known for their sturdiness.
No, but they make a lot of noise and they're cheap. So I can't complain. And it's so, that bright yellow color, no one's thinking that you are carrying a gun. That makes your life so much easier. No one thinks you're hunting. And, usually, like I said, I prefer the hawk in an area around baseball field. It fits into the narrative of what I'm doing. Why am I in this woods? Oh, I'm looking for a ball. No one questions you when you are carrying a wiffle bat.
It's actually brilliant. Yeah, I gotta hand it to you. That's actually really smart. Yeah, I mean, and it looks better than carrying around one of those nice sturdy hickory axe handles or whatever that you used to carrying around when I'm squirrel hawking and stuff.
Absolutely,
that's hilarious, man. To look into that. Yeah. I would have, that's something I definitely would have never thought of.
You just got to, from just basic profiling, from a criminal profile, you want to fit what you're doing there.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's, man, there's so many new wrinkles in the brain after this conversation, man. It's great. And as far as like the dachshunds themselves, I mean, what in particular, is there anything else that now that you would want to have as part of your hunting team, or is it pretty much just going to be dachshunds from here on out for you?
If I stay in the Northeast, I'm probably going to stick with the dachshund.
Yeah.
Just because of the small size. It's great advantage that they don't roam too large. Especially, I'm hawking in an area less than a third of an acre half the time, especially in between, an area between a shopping mall or a baseball field or something like that. So that's great. The fact that they're on and off dog. So everyone tells me they could be potentially aggressive. I'll tell you, no, they're not. They're great little dogs. They get along great with my kids. My kids loves the dog. My kids could care less if my hawk died, but God forbid if something happens to my dog, I'm definitely paying for it. So my kids are in love with the dogs. We go out with them all the time, and they're small. They don't eat a lot. So that's the benefit for them. You don't realize dog food's pretty expensive now. Yeah. So you have a little 5-6 pound dog. Guess what? A bag of food lasts a month and a half now.
Yeah.
So
half cup a day or whatever it goes a long way.
It goes a long way. It doesn't cost a lot to feed. You could put them in your bag. There's no threat to a lot of people. And the danger to them is obviously you get your dog, your hawk can definitely hurt them, and coyotes and stray dogs that can come out and injure your dog. That's the main thing that I worry about, on them going into a hole. That's the biggest I would say if there's any drawback for me with hawking with a dachshund is I hate digging. So, they'll go into a groundhog hole and they'll sit there and and now you're worried about it. If it's going to be down there for a day or two, a night, what's going on? Like we've had the last, was it 2 years ago, hawking season? My dog went into a rabbit hole and stayed there overnight. And then the transmitter died on me. Everything didn't work. And my kids are crying. And there's nothing worse than, a little girl crying because she's missing her dog. Yeah. My goshawk was on fire that day. I was like, I'm not going to catch anything. And I can't go out and hawk because everyone's going to look at me like a weirdo to go out and leave your dog there. So, and it was one of those communities. Everyone who had a dog came out and helped me dug a hole. We dug a huge hole. Subsequently, next day, we came out the next day. Sure enough, found her still looking for a rabbit. Like nothing happened. And we're like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever. So to me, that would be the negative things. Is now when I go out hawking, I carry, shovels, digging tools, all of that stuff to go along with it. You would never think that you would have to.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like for me, it would be hard to come home. I don't think I would still probably be fully married after. It would be like there would probably be at least a partial divorce or separation if something happened in my scenario also. And I was just thinking, like in your scenario, you're probably thinking back to like, okay, what was it like? Have to revert back to my 14-year-old self that was crashing on couches and probably, I'm sure it was probably kind of hairy for you as well.
Well, the last time at the falconer meet, I'm already going, okay, this dog's, I want to count it as a loss right now. And I'm already talking to another breeder. Like, all right, we got to get a replacement stat. Because my kids cannot function without their dogs. So it was definitely one of those things I have to focus now as thinking as not just as a falconer, but thinking of as a dad and a husband who has kids who are absolutely in love with these dogs.
Yeah.
So from a hawking side, I had to go back to that question as like, would I keep another dog? Probably not. Like, considering if I stay where I am and hawking the same type of quarry and using the same type of bird. Obviously, if I'm doing a long wing, that's not going to work too well. But given where I am, I would definitely not change what I do. It's a good template here. A small dog that doesn't arouse any suspicion, doesn't give you any issue, and it can go into every place that a rabbit can go. And that is something that, and another bright side to these little small dogs is that they don't roam far.
Yeah.
And my Brittany would run out 60 yards away from me, and that doesn't work well when you're in an urban area.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that towards the end of this last season, which was both of those dogs' first full season that I have, I definitely saw the need for the e-collar training and everything to come into play, by the end of that first season for sure. Because they were starting to kind of not listen as well and starting to range out a little bit more. Not quite like, a football field or whatever, but like, far enough to where it was concerning. And I wouldn't be able to get over there quick enough if they did go that much extra further. So I'm totally get that. But there's two other questions that I've been asking people too, and just to get your take on it. Because I want to get like a pretty consistent little survey going here, on what people's thoughts are. But when do you think is the best time to get a puppy? As far as when take one home from a breeder, and what do you personally do to mitigate the complete and total what seems to be lack of ability to completely housebreak them?
Ooh, the second one I definitely don't know, because I have one dog that still gets too excited and just pees all over the place. So if it rains, they just don't want to go outside. That is one thing that I just can't go around. If it's a rainy day, you might as well accept the fact that they're gonna people poo somewhere in your house clandestinely. They'll sneak in your closet. You'll find a little surprise here and there. So you can't go around that. So I don't think anyone can solve that problem. As far as the first one, both of my dog, I picked them up at 10 weeks. So I have two females, dachshund, Kiwi and Penny. 10 weeks, I've for what it's worth, that's my only experience. And I just raise them just like the way how everyone else kind of been dealing with it. Just give them plenty of love and show them plenty of smell, and the rabbits, letting them run around. Like I would drag, dead rabbits, let them follow the smell, let them get exposed to that environment. That kind of helped them out and give them confidence. Just let them go out in the field, let them smell all the new stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, just from what I've, all the people I've talked to about the question number 2, literally and metaphorically, for these dogs is, the only foolproof way you can housebreak them is to not have them in the house at all.
Absolutely. But then they want to be everywhere you want to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
This dog wants to be everywhere I go. I've not.
I've got one that's like that too. Yeah, especially the other one, not quite as much, but he does want to be involved. But one in particular, he does not like it whenever he's not around, for sure.
My dog pretty much lives in the house, and she's constantly in my daughter's room, my son's room. And then when they see me put on shoes, then it's chaos. They go, oh, he's going out. The moment they see me grabbing all of my bags, they're like, oh, I better go out. I'm going to create hell. And my wife is like, you better take those dogs out, or else they're going to sit there and whine for the next hours because you go out without them. So they know when I'm going out with the birds. Mm-hmm. So they'll lose their mind if I don't go out without them. So I usually get guilted into taking them out with me. Mm-hmm. But I will say, I've the amount of rabbits in particular, or even squirrels, the game animal that I'm seeing now is just so much more, because they're kicking up more ground, flushing up more stuff. And, I'm not realizing how many rabbits I must have passed years ago. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't see it. And even with the red tail up in the sky, especially in Jersey, our cover is so dense. It is definitely not what you're seeing out in the Midwest, where you walk around, there's rabbits kicking up everywhere. Here, it's, 6-7 foot briar of thorns everywhere, and I'm wearing an overall just to crash into these things and beating the brush. So
yeah. Is there any last thoughts that you want to share about the breed in particular before we move on, or any other things that have, I don't know, worthy of noting or whatever before we?
No, I think they're pretty much what you're hearing about them. The book that Teddy wrote was a great book on why they're best suited for small game, especially if you're looking at rabbits and squirrel. I can't think of better dogs for that, especially if you don't have a lot of hunting ground, like large area. If you're roaming for miles and miles, that's totally a different story. But I think most of us falconers in Jersey and in the Northeast, you don't have that much property. I think that's perfectly suited for what we do in this area. I think I can't think of a better dog as a to aid a falconer in catching games and finding games.
Yeah. Perfect, man. Well, you've already shared so many really funny and interesting stories, but is there any particular, I don't know, when it comes to like actual like hunting, or any particular bird that you've had or dog in particular, like any actual experience with any of the above, that aside from just some of the different things that you've had to deal with, kind of growing up and kind of, some of your earlier experiences with falconry. But is there a particular hunting experience or a flight or anything that you can think of that is like kind of pops to the forefront of your mind as far as it's worthy of sharing? Or
absolutely. One of the going back to my memory, I've been hawking squirrels and rabbits for most of my life. So one of the ultimate goal for me was catching ducks. And my last experience, the bird that I'm flying right now, my female Finnish goshawk, the last season, before COVID, and I'm sorry, before that whole avian influenza, which we didn't hunt last year, the year before that, I went out with Paul and Phil and Casey, and I think we went out trying to catch a duck. And I've been trying to catch a duck forever. We just couldn't get the right slip, and so I didn't understand the mechanism. So what ended up happening was Phil and Paul showed me the right way, and we finally got this duck by this strip mall. Like I kid you not, I couldn't get more urban than this. It was just between two parking lots, and there was a creek in the middle, elevated above. My goshawk perfectly caught it, and it was a steep embankment. And so I just bought myself a new pair of Oakleys. That's how I remembered it. And As I'm running down, I'm trying to grab the ducks, and I see the ducks trying to get away, so I just jump right in. And this was in the middle of winter, like dead winter. Everything's frozen. So I jumped in, grabbed my ducks. My phone got wet, lost my sunglasses. I lost so many things. And pulling my ducks out, I'm, giving everyone high five. All of my clothes are completely frozen. And here I am in the middle of a parking lot, stripping to my underwear, trying to find dry clothes. And everyone's just driving around looking at us like, what is wrong with these guys? So that would be my last funny story that I could say that I will always remember because, jumping into an ice cold creek, 5 feet of water, losing my brand new sunglasses that I just purchased the night before. And my wife's looking at me like, what is wrong with you? For a duck, you could, and I took the time to do the whole, went from field to table. I filleted it. I made a nice dinner out of it. And my wife just looks at me like, you could have just bought ducks. But she couldn't understand that the amount of work. And, I've idolized this whole concept of like, when I was younger, you read this book, the goshawk book, all this stuff. And everyone talked about how hard it was to get a goshawk to catch ducks, to get that timing perfect. I just got, I'm in my mid 40s now. I just got goshawk maybe 5 or 7 years ago. So now I'm just getting into that whole mode. So now it's like, oh, that was a perfect picture of what I wanted to do, to get that initial first kill. This way my bird can go, oh, so the dot can connect. Mm-hmm. So I worked so hard to get that slip, and I didn't want that duck to just get away. And I was like, all costs, no matter what, I am jumping in that water, and like pretty much dove headfirst into ice cold water. Pull that duck out, and it was definitely something that was one of the most memorable flights for me, because unfortunately, as great as squirrel hawking is, I kind of do it every day.
Yeah.
So it just becomes it's a regular thing for me to catch a duck in flight. Traditional stuff that you see on YouTube. I've never had that opportunity, and with goshawk and most of the birds, if you don't see their regular quarry, they just go, I don't know what that is. So you can have a bird that's doing perfectly well, and all of a sudden you go take it somewhere else to find a new game, and it's just stand there, look at you like, what is that? Am I supposed to catch that? So that was definitely one of my best flight to my memory.
It's great, man. Whenever you do something new, and I've mentioned this before, like anytime you catch like a new type of quarry, and especially if it's one that you've hyped up in your mind, at least it may not always be the upper echelon, but man, you've hyped it up in your mind as like this next amazing thing that you're going to be able to personally accomplish and stuff. It's hard to beat that first catch of that particular quarry. I mean, it really is. I mean, I still remember the first jackrabbit I caught, even cottontail, squirrel. I mean, it's hard to beat, man.
Yeah. I look forward to catching jackrabbit one day. One day.
Well, you know what we need to do? We need to all get together and organize a trip. I mean, I know some places and some resources out west. We can. We all need to organize a big trip out west sometime. And
definitely, and I love the opportunity.
Oh man, it's hard to beat some good jackrabbit hawking, man. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I just went out to California just a couple days ago to be exact, and I was just amazed by the amount of open space. It's like me coming from New Jersey. I've never seen so much open space in my entire life. I was like, oh my God, I could see for miles away. I never understood when all these long wings are like, oh yeah, you need to see 2 miles away. I was like, Jersey, you can't see 2 miles away.
No. Yeah, no, it's funny. It's like you cross the Mississippi from east to west, and all of a sudden everything just opens up.
Absolutely.
It's hilarious.
It's one of those lessons. As much as I want to, play around with long wings, it's just a waste of my time out here. It's something that's like, sticking with goshawk. I like catching games. It's not what you want to do. It's what you're, as every book will tell you, you fly what you have the quarry for, what's your terrain to do. That's the way to be successful in falconry. You got to hunt something that your bird can hunt, and you have plenty of opportunity. Like you see 1 slips a day, it's not good.
Right.
It's like 3 or 4. And, even with, suburban squirrels, they learn, they understand, oh, this guy with the birds is bad news. Because I got to a point where I would hawk the same spot over and over. In the beginning of the year, in September, the squirrels would run up the tree. That's their normal tactic. By February, they know who I am. They see my car. They actually run into a storm drain And then I was like, okay. And my daughter's like, is that like evolution, Dad? I was like, yeah, that's survival of the fittest. Because now they go, oh, yeah, that guy comes out of the car. We're not running up the tree anymore. Yeah. We're running right into the pseudo drain.
Yeah, I mean, all the ones that didn't learn the lesson already in your freezer.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's, you know, going out squirrel hawking is kind of something I always tell everybody. Like, it's because it was kind of, when I first got into falconry, it was frowned upon for you to catch red tail. To use red tail to catch squirrels. It was kind of like, that's not appropriate because, you know, your bird can get bit. Yes. And everyone says the same thing about goshawk. They're like, oh, how could you use a goshawk to catch squirrels? But that's all the game you have. And in the wild, they do catch squirrels. And yes, my bird definitely get bit the first couple of times. But then once they get the idea, it's probably, in my opinion, one of the best spectacular flight ever. Because it goes, you know, with a red tail, it just goes horizontal and then there's a drop. With a squirrel flight, you could stay underneath that tree for 30 minutes, especially a large oak tree.
Yep.
You could sit there underneath that tree and your goshawk will sit there, play chess back and forth. And it's a great workout for the hawk to sit there 30 minutes flying back and forth. It you know, I can't think of a better way for a hawk to get, you know, in shape. They fly around, constant chasing stuff for about 40 minutes, and you're not going anywhere. You're just staying underneath the tree. As long as if there's no hole, you're perfect.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a bulging disc in your neck, you know, by the end of it, but you know, it's a hell of a lot of fun, and that's why, you know, like even with red tails and hare, whatever the species is, that's why I've come to like squirrel hawking so much more. You're just so much more engaging, and it's a prolonged thing. I mean, yeah, I mean, you can watch a red tail, you know, kind of flop out of a tree or whatever, you know, you make a short flight and then like a dive, you know, for a rabbit or whatever the case, but it usually doesn't happen in front of you. You usually don't get to see the end result. And the squirrel hawking, I mean, it's all happening right above you. And,
absolutely.
And that's why I love it. And I can imagine it doesn't matter what you're flying. For me, there's nothing that's going to beat it as far as dirt hawking type, you know, quarry goes for sure. But
it's definitely, I would say, you know, and there's an abundance of games everywhere, especially in the Northeast. There's squirrels everywhere. Every park, every schoolyard has squirrels. So the more game you have, the more you make that connection for your bird to go, hey, there's a use to this guy here. You know, when I, you know, to give you some of the dumb stuff I've done, when I first started falconry, I had a red tail and I was like, I want to use it like a goshawk, you know, to catch a pigeon on the wing. Let's just say that was not successful. I realized the red tail just stood there and like, what do you want me to do with this? Catch this thing. And I would sneak up on a flock of pigeon as I'm throwing seeds to them. And I would sit there, toss this red tail, and the red tail would just fly right up to a tree. And I'm like, what is wrong with this thing? Once again, lack of sponsorship, but you learn it the hard way. And they go, okay, this does not work.
Yep.
So, you know, as I'm walking by and those things, you know, the bird flew down and grabbed a rabbit. It's like, oh. And that's when the light bulb goes ahead. And it goes back with the falconry concept that, you know, like my bird, I don't really connect with my bird until after that first kill or two. And then they go, oh, yeah, you're not useless. And at that point, you know, you can see the connections being made where your bird goes, yeah, I want to hang around with you. If you don't produce, especially with goshawk, if you don't produce game fast enough for them, they're like, oh, I could go do this on my own without you.
Yep.
And then you're going to be chasing your birds for a while now.
Yep. No, for sure. That's killer though, man. I'm glad that, I'm glad that you've been able to adapt and overcome throughout your life and been able to make the most of all your opportunities, man. It sounds like you've led, like I said, an ultra interesting life, if nothing else. And, you know, I know you've already given kind of in the course of this conversation, you've already kind of given a couple of good pieces of advice, but if you don't care, I mean, before we wrap this up, I want to go ahead and get one more, like what you think is one of the more important pieces of advice that you've learned. I mean, you've been through a lot of stuff. So, I mean, like any kind of extra piece of advice that you can think of to leave people before we call this good, man, I think it would be appreciated.
Well, to make it falconry related, I would say one of the lessons that I think most people kind of overlook, and I've sponsored about 4 apprentices already. One of the biggest the mistake that everyone does, they overtrain their bird. That is something that I see a flaw. It's like, you know, I usually tell everybody, hey, I get my bird flying in about 2.5 weeks. If you're doing something past that, if your bird flies to you at 40, 50 feet, guess what? It's gonna fly to you. You don't need to do this 100 times. Like one of my biggest thing that with most apprentices I get to deal with, they're so scared of letting their bird go, and they would just fly to fish over and over. They'll spend an entire 2 weeks doing that every day, and then expect the bird to go out and hunt and look at outside rather than them. I was like, that would be my biggest thing that I always tell every apprentice is like, hey, don't overtrain your bird. Once your bird comes to you, the bird knows what to do. Time to go out hunting. The worst case scenario, you lose your bird, but it is what it is. I've seen the mistakes where a couple of apprentices overtrain their bird. Bird comes back, becomes aggressive at you because now you become that food source. So to me, I think that is something that I always try to tell everybody. Don't overtrain your bird. Give them plenty of opportunity, get them plenty of slips, and everything works itself out. I follow what McDermott says. Like a lot of problems can just be resolved by just hunting. All of your behavior issue with birds, just go out and hunt. It resolves all of your issues. Mm-hmm. Your bird will come back exhausted, and it sees a value in you. So there's no pent up energy. I definitely don't do the food association too much. But that was, I think, I mean, as a guy who imprinted a goshawk, I definitely got my scars from, I bled a lot. I went through a couple of boxes of Band-Aids. I would tell you that. But what solved all of my problems was I just continued to work through it, and then based on, didn't overtrain my bird, just kept on hunting it. Once it got that first kill, or 2 or 3, it's just, I don't know why, but you could see that they connected the dot. And I go, this guy's not the food or so. I always, I remember I would shake a tree and the squirrel's running up and I'm thinking my goshawk's coming at the squirrel. No, comes right at my face. I was like, I couldn't understand that. And I was like, what is wrong with this bird? Sure enough, in their eyes, you just took away their squirrels. Mm-hmm. But eventually they made that connection. And then once that connection's made, I didn't, it was just went out naturally. I just hunted everything. So that would be my best advice to a lot of people. Just go out in the field. Don't overtrain your bird.
Great stuff, man. This has been a pleasure. And this is, like I said, one of the things that I love about doing this stuff the most is you get to hear so many interesting experiences and stories. And we'll have to say your experiences and stories are some of the more interesting that I've heard, man. I can't imagine having to deal with some of that stuff at such an early age. And, yeah, man, like I said, I all the props in the world to you for continuing to make it work all these years and for working through all that stuff, man.
It's the drive to survive, sir. It's one of those, it's a great lesson because I think I was a spoiled little kid, and that, everything I tell my wife and kids today is like, appreciate what you have, because I kind of knew what it was like not to have anything. Mm-hmm. And, you gotta know, there's days when I go, it's not a great day, but you know what? I've been at the bottom. So now I know no matter what, it's a great day.
For sure, dude. Like I said earlier, man, it's all about perspective and being able to see the world from so many different angles and perspectives. And yeah, man, it's really experience that you go through life. And whenever you do get it, it's really invaluable. It really is. I mean, there's nothing that can replace it. So, yeah. Well, Killer, man, like I said, thank you again so much for dedicating part of a day to come and do this and to hang out. And it's been a lot of fun, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. My pleasure.
Yeah, man. Well, let's finish our Starbucks here and move on. Cheers, buddy.
Thank you, sir.